Morning everybody. My name's Chris. I work for Green Building Renewables. We're based in York and we offer a full range of renewable technologies, solar panels, heat pumps, car chargers, underfloor heating. There's all the bits and pieces that we do. So I've been asked to come today and have a little bit of chat about solar. So I'll try and run through the basics of solar panels. I don't want to get too technical or too involved. I can answer some questions at the open forum later, or I'm in the corner of the room just there. If you want to come and chat about anything specific, then please feel free to do so. So why choose solar now? So that's just a little bit of a graph to show the actual increase in kilowatt hours costs for the actual purchasing of electric. We've had to sort of modify the slides relatively recently because it's been capped, thankfully, around about the 34p mark going into the new year, when there were sort of, we did have some projections of going up to like 40, 60, 70p a kilowatt. So thankfully, although it's not ideal, it has increased quite dramatically, as you can see. The prices have been capped to around about 34p a kilowatt hour. Obviously, people will be on a little bit lower, a little bit higher, depending on a fixed or a variable rate. But generally, the slides that we'll show today will do some projections based on the new price cap that's coming in on the October, so it's in the next couple of weeks. This is just a graph just to give a little bit of a demonstration about sort of the costs of a solar system just now, and sort of like the generated or the estimated paybacks that you'll get from a system. So the price at the top there, around at the end of the £10,850. Again, this is just sort of very sort of like basic figures. It's obviously depend on your size of the system you put in and the property and the survey and everything else. But generally speaking, a 12 panel system, which generates around about just over 4 kilowatt hours. And a battery system, so a couple of batteries which will store the excess electricity. Again, I can elaborate on that later for you. Costing around about the £10,800 mark. So what we would say is, or we'd predict with the new energy prices at 34p, at the moment your payback is probably around about 8 years, which is something that everybody sort of like asks about. What's the payback? What sort of time can they expect to recoup my investment? The battery system now, it's very rare that we actually install a system without batteries, because in essence what that enables you to do is to use 100% of the electricity that's generated. In the past, before the battery technology became more efficient, you were probably looking to use around about 50-60% of the electricity that was generated, just on your base load and general usage during the course of the day. Obviously with the battery storage you can increase that up to 100%. You can actually power some of your appliances during the night as well. There's various things you can do with the batteries as well, whereby you can actually buy electricity from the grid, like the old Economy 7, fill up the batteries at the night time. So it's all about, we can tell you how much the electricity the panels will generate, but it's up to yourself how efficient you are with it in terms of storage and usage and timings and everything else like that. So in terms of the costs and the paybacks, around about 7-8 years. So a little bit about how the solar panels work. So one of the misconceptions, or one of the questions that we're asked all the time is, do I need to have a south-facing elevation? Well, ideally, the panels will obviously generate more electricity on a good south-facing elevation. That's a nice typical house. So the south-facing elevation, we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 panels on there. So that's a 4 kilowatt system that we alluded to before. However, if your house is orientated what we'd call an east-west split, we can obviously put panels either side, on the east and the west, so it will benefit in the morning on the east side, and then obviously benefit on the sun later on in the evening. So that's what we'd call an east-west split. In terms of efficiencies, probably drop down about 10% compared to a south-facing elevation. But it was just really making the point that don't worry if your house doesn't have a true south-facing elevation, we can look to install on the east and the west. For obvious reasons, we don't recommend anything on the north-facing elevation. it would just lose efficiencies totally. But I say if you have a north-facing elevation, then generally you'll have a good south-facing elevation. So it's just really to say that don't worry too much about the orientation of the house. Provided you've got some clear roof space, then we can accommodate some panels on the house. One of the things that obviously will affect the efficiency of the panels is the shading aspect. So again, that's something that we'll pick up on a survey. There are sort of pieces of equipment that can help to negate the efficiencies of the solar. Again, without going into too much detail, we can actually put optimizers on individual panels. So if one panel's shaded, it doesn't affect the others. But again, shading is something that we do need to take into account. But depending on the amount of shade and how much it affects the panels during the course of the day, we can take measures to actually negate that. But again, not ideal if there is shading there. But again, it isn't a deal breaker, and we can talk about that a bit later if anybody has any questions. So we touched on before, the benefits of installing the battery, pretty straightforward really. As I said before, before the battery technology became a little bit more efficient and more cost effective, you were probably looking at using about 50–60% of the electricity that was generated, and the rest unfortunately went back to the grid. There was a payment for it, but obviously it would be more beneficial to actually use the electricity that's generated rather than put it back into the grid. So it's very rare, as I said before, that we will install a system without the batteries. So just a little bit about how the batteries are installed and how the system works. There's, I've got the schematic up on the standard I've got through there, but that's just a little bit of a layout in terms of the actual circuit of how the batteries and the inverter and the panels actually integrated into your home. So we have the solar panels on the roof, which are obviously generating the electricity. When the sunlight hits the panels, there's a reaction with the cells inside the panel, and it creates a DC current, which is fed into the home, and then the big white box at the top is called an inverter. So all solar installs will have an inverter, and that will convert the DC current that's generated from the panels into an AC current, which is obviously the electricity you can use within the home. So when there's a demand for electric in the house, the first thing it will do is it will call for see if there's any energy in the inverter, and that will come through into the system in the home. Any excess electricity is fed into the batteries, and then on an evening, obviously when the panels aren't generating, it will call for electricity from the batteries. So the very last sort of option, or the very last thing it will call from the grid, if there isn't any generated from the panels, there isn't anything in the batteries, last option it will actually call from and take something from the grid. You're probably looking around about, we try not to say that you'll be totally self-sufficient from the grid. There always will be a need to draw from the grid. But as we said before, we can tell you how much electricity you actually generate, but how you use it and how you store it and how you sort of take advantage of the system is down to your own habits really. When we install the system, we will put in an app on your mobile phone. Like everything else, you get an app for most things nowadays. So it will give you an idea, an indication of how you're using the electricity, how efficient the system is. So it really does focus the mind a little bit, but it just sort of like gives you an idea of how the system works and how to take benefits of the electricity that you're generating. Another little option that we can put on as another bolt-on with the solar system is we can put in something that's called a solar iBoost, or an immersion diverter. So basically during the summer months when there's a lot of electricity being generated, it can actually divert into, you need to have a water cylinder, and we put a diverter in there, so that will actually store or it will send electricity to the immersion, so you'll get sort of free hot water for maybe 3 months of the year. So that's another bolt-on that you can have as part of the installation, but you do need to have a water cylinder for us to actually connect up to. We get asked quite a lot as well about, as I said before, about selling back to the grid and the tariffs. It's not as attractive as it used to be when the feed-in tariff was in place, maybe 10, 12 years ago when that started up. But if you do a little bit of research on the web, if there is any excess electricity that needs to go back to the grid, providing you have a smart meter, you can hook up to a scheme that's called a Smart Export Guarantee, or SEG, the acronym SEG. So you can have that with any utility provider. You don't need to go with the utility provider you're with at the moment. And I think at the moment you're looking to get around about 7 or 8p a kilowatt hour for anything that actually goes back to the grid. If there is any surplus, the idea is obviously to try and maximise and use as much as you can in the home. If you do a little bit of research as well, Octopus Energy are a good one to look at. They do like an agile tariff. So if you do have the battery storage, you can actually buy electricity from your utility provider at a lower cost, sort of between sort of like 12 and midnight to 4 a.m. So you can actually buy electricity from the grid. Don't quote me on these prices, but around about 15p, 20p a kilowatt. And you can actually buy electricity and store it in your batteries and then discharge it during the day or the evening the following day. So again, it's just all about maximising the efficiencies and using sort of all the different options that you've got with the battery system and the solar that's generated. It's all a little bit up in the air at the moment, obviously, with the energy and the utility bills, but I'd say Octopus Energy are a good one to call in on in terms of the functionality of the buying like the old Economy 7 rate during the evening. We also install the EV chargers as well, so you can actually integrate the EV charger for the electric car in with the system. So again, that will actually put any excess electricity into the car charger. You can have it on slow, fast or medium charges, so depending on how quick you wanted the car or if it was going to be a particularly good day, the car was needed tomorrow. It's all about setting up the system just again to sort of get the maximum benefits out of the electricity that you actually produce. As a very sort of like rough idea, I mean everybody's usage is a little bit different, but a 4 kilowatt system would probably generate somewhere in the region of about 4,000 kilowatt hours in the year. And if we sort of very basic maths, if we're saying 30p a kilowatt hour, if you use 100% of your electricity, you're probably looking at saving around about £1,200 in the year, which is where we go back to around about the 8 years on the payback, as we said before. The system's going to cost around about £10,000. The other thing you'd need to factor in, obviously, which we'd look at under this survey, is scaffold access. We actually use a third-party scaffolding company, but that will all be included in the price and the service for you. So there's my recap. It's sort of really self-explanatory, really. You want to lower your energy costs, be less reliable on the grid, and obviously lowering your carbon footprint. I'm sure there's plenty of questions. I've probably not covered everything because there are, we can do in-roof, we can do on-roof, different types of slates and tiles and everything else. But generally speaking, if I can get some details about the property, I can give a rough idea of how many panels you can get on there. We try to sort of price condition when the inquiries come through onto the website. If it's something we're interested in, we ask for pictures of the property and then we look to organise a no obligation survey for you. My name's Chris. If you want to come and speak to me or ask me a question later on, then please feel free to do so.